This presentation focuses on self-regulation and was created for the EDTC 618 Learning Theories, Motivation, and Relationship to Technology course for the spring 2019 semester with Dr. Jimenez, and it was created and presented by Jonathan Rothman, Marie Pellegrini, and Christine de Medici. Social cognitive theory and self-regulation. In social cognitive theory, human behavior is extensively motivated and regulated by the ongoing exercise of self-influence. The major self-regulative mechanism operates through three principal subfunctions. These include self-monitoring of one's behavior, its determinants, and its effects, judgment of one's behavior in relation to personal standards and environmental circumstances, and effective self-reaction. In the 1960s, Albert Bandura developed a theory of imitation and modeling separate from the behaviorist roots of Miller and Dollard. This perspective reflects a blending of behaviorist concepts and cognitive notions. Social cognitive theory, or Maud tells us, focuses on the ways in which people learn by observing one another. Social cognitive theory favors a model of causation involving triadic reciprocal determinism. In this model of reciprocal causation outlined in the image to the right, behavior, cognition, and other personal factors and environmental influences all operate as interacting determinants that influence each other bidirectionally. It is important to note that reciprocal causation does not mean that the different sources of influence are of equal strength. Some may be stronger than others. In addition, it cannot be assumed that reciprocal influences all occur simultaneously. It is essential to understand that it takes time for a causal factor to exert its influence and activate reciprocal influences. Therefore, the general principles of social cognitive theory are: people can learn by observing others' behaviors and the consequences that result. Learning can occur without a change in behavior. Cognition plays important roles in learning, and people can have considerable control over their actions and environments. Self-regulation, by definition, is the process whereby students activate and sustain cognitions, behaviors, and affects that are systematically oriented toward the attainment of their goals. Social cognitive theorists propose that, although the environment influences behavior, over time people began to regulate their own behavior, developing their own standards for performance, observing and self-evaluating, reinforcing and punishing themselves, and self-reflecting on performances, goals, and beliefs. As children grow and develop, they observe others and take note of the consequences that result from their behaviors, and eventually learn which behaviors are acceptable based on these observations. As educators, we can help students develop and hone their self-regulating skills by teaching techniques like self-instruction, self-monitoring, self-reinforcement, and self-imposed stimulus control. Children who demonstrate self-regulatory skills are able to focus their attention, control their emotions, and manage their thinking, behavior, and feelings. From the perspective of social cognitive theorists, effective self-regulation entails several processes. At the center of self-regulation lies the ability to set standards and goals for oneself. Mature human beings tend to set standards for their own behavior. In other words, they establish criteria regarding what constitutes acceptable performance. They also identify certain goals that they value and toward which they direct many of their behaviors. Once these standards and goals have been established, self-observation, self-evaluation, self-reaction, and self-reflection are essential to continue and maintaining self-regulation. Self-observation, or observing oneself in action, is an important part of self-regulation. In order to make progress toward important goals, people must critique their own performance and identify aspects that are working well and that need improvement. A person's behavior is frequently judged by others. However, eventually, people begin to judge themselves and evaluate their own behaviors based on the standards they've developed for themselves. This process is known as self-evaluation and is essential in the next principle of self-regulation. Once an individual has observed and evaluated their behaviors based on the standards they've developed for themselves, people begin to self-react by either reinforcing themselves for goal accomplishment or punishing themselves when they do something that doesn't meet their self-chosen standards. This self-praise and self-criticism can be as influential in altering behavior as the reinforcements and punishments that others administer. Finally, the last core principle of self-regulation is self-reflection. Truly self-regulating individuals reflect on and critically examine their goals, past successes and failures, and beliefs about their abilities, and they make any adjustments to their goals, behaviors, and beliefs that seem warranted. In Bandura's view, such self-reflection is the most distinctly human aspect of self-regulation.
Self-regulating learners tend to be those who set mastery goals for their performance. They also set short-term as well as long-term goals for themselves. For example, they may tell themselves, I need to complete my science homework before playing video games. Self-regulating learners enhance their sense of competence, self-efficacy, and bring productive motives and positive emotions to a learning situation. They tend to also attribute successful outcomes to things they themselves have done, for instance, hard work and use of strategies, or put a positive spin on disappointing events. For example, they may not have gotten the grade they anticipated, however, they learned a lot from the assignment. A disadvantage of self-regulating is that only a small number of students ever become great self-regulators due to the lack of instructional processes that promote self-regulated learning in their lives. If a person experiences failure and decreased self-efficacy, it could affect their ability and desire to self-regulate. Self-regulation refers to an individual's self-generated thoughts, feelings, and emotions that are systematically designed to affect one's learning. Self-regulation is more of a strategy for achieving one's goals, especially in relation to learning. This might be difficult for students with learning disabilities and other diagnoses to generalize in other situations beyond the context where it was initially learned in the classroom.
As Christine and Marie mentioned in the previous slides, self-regulation is a great way to keep students motivated in their work and monitor their learning. Let's look at an example on how self-regulation can be used in the classroom. For instance, a teacher wants the class to revise their writing pieces. The class has gone over different strategies on how to edit and revise their writing. The teacher will send out a Google form listing the strategies the class can use. The students have to pick 3 strategies they are going to use and set a goal for themselves. At the end of the writing period, students reflect on how well they kept to their goal and what they can do better the following day to meet their goal if it had not already been met. The activity supports the idea of goal setting, self-observation, self-evaluation, and self-reflection. As educators, we must model, use, and encourage our students to use digital technologies to regulate their own learning. In addition, students who regularly use digital resources in their personal life should easily be able to use them in their academic endeavors as well. Google Classroom is a great digital tool to assist students in their efforts of self-regulating. With the use of this program, teachers have the opportunity to facilitate Google Hangouts, which would allow communication and collaboration between anyone in the class. For example, in a language arts classroom, a teacher might use Google Classroom for students to submit drafts of their written work for feedback as they work on a project or assignment in order to get meaningful feedback in a timely fashion. This gives the students the opportunity to set a goal each day on how much they need to get done to be able to submit their project on time.